Righto. So first things first, we will do introduction of new staff. I think that's you, Sam, if you want to introduce Melissa. You're on mute.
Much better. It's my pleasure to introduce Melissa Souza. Melissa is our new payroll specialist, and I believe she started, and she'll correct me, October 18th.
Iana's date, September 27th.
Oh, sooner than even. Okay. And it's been wonderful having Melissa here. Melissa worked, I think, at least 15 years, and again, she'll correct, in the Cambridge public schools in a similar capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And we're lucky to have her. And certainly Renan is appreciative of having her because we've been short-staffed in the payroll function for some time. And so wanted everybody to get an opportunity to see Melissa. And I don't know if you want to say anything, Melissa, but now would be the time.
Well, you were right. I have about 15 years of experience in Cambridge. And I'm just happy to be part of the district, and I look forward to helping build and improve things going forward.
Thanks, Melissa. Well, it's so nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you guys as well. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be part of Brookline.
That's great.
Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you.
Well, I don't think we want to hold you up. It was just nice to say hello and then let you go do your thing. If you want to stay, you're welcome to, but
back to Dexter New Blood.
Thanks,
Thank you guys so much. Have a great night.
Have a good night.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, next item on the agenda, approval of the November 17th minutes. Can I get a motion for approval? Thanks, Stephen, in a second. I'll second it. Susan, how do you vote?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Okay.
And I vote yes. And then the next thing is acceptance of gifts. There's an anonymous gift from to the Heath School for Spiritwear, Heath Spiritwear. Can I get a motion to accept the gift? Stephen, in a second.
Sure.
Was that a yes? I'm taking that as a yes. Okay, Susan, how do you vote?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
I vote yes. And then we have grants for two programs. One is well, actually, Sam, do you want to talk about them really quickly? Because I know that one of them is an exciting opportunity.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. And I just want to get the right attachment. If it's for the 200,000.
There's two there. One's the 200,000 and the other one is
for a smaller amount.
USAC. USAC.
Oh, USAC. Okay.
Emergency Connectivity Fund.
So let's start with that first. I'm just catching up with all the attachments here. Here we go. Now we'll start. Well, that's Spiritwear. We talked about that. Here we go. So 141,895.60. And I want to thank Feng Yang, the CIO of the town. She had put this together. These are monies that come on everybody's phone bill. There's a universal service fund charge, and it doesn't seem like a lot until you look at the whole country pays this, and it's billions of dollars. And so it goes to improve connectivity for schools and libraries and rural areas and things like that. And so again, there was an opportunity and Fung submitted, and we received the grant, and it's covering two pieces. One is to buy 298 Chromebooks and the licenses, and those are going to benefit largely our paraprofessionals in the district to better serve students. And the other piece of it is paying T-Mobile to maintain the 340 hotspots for internet access throughout the district. Happy to answer any questions, but that's the first grant. Yes.
So these E-rates is what they're called, right? Or something like that?
E-rate is the program, correct?
This is something that I remember hearing about years ago, and I think we never took advantage of it. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of us not taking advantage of it, although Brookline would, it's tied, the reimbursement or that you get is tied to your free and reduced lunch. And so Brookline would generally get a lower percentage. It started with paying for like cell phones and things like that. And then eventually it's paying for things like switches and routers and the kind of things we're talking about here. I can't speak to the past. I would have hoped that.
I don't think we accessed it up until now because we never accepted money.
Don,
Yeah.
are you aware? Donna, are you aware of? Because it would have been in a revolving fund. No,
we don't have a
revolving fund for E-rate. Okay.
There has not been a grant since I've worked here for the last couple of years for this purpose.
I guess Matt's raising his hand. Are you aware, Matt, of?
So yeah, you can either take it as a check, as you'll recall,
Or a discount.
or a credit on your phone bill. I don't review the phone bills, so I don't know if that was set up.
I remember Mary Ellen talking about it, and then I don't remember it ever happening. I remember asking her about it because it had been brought up at a MASC meeting.
The programs, I think, started in the mid to late 90s, telephone and
right to
internet
me.
connectivity. So it's been around. It might have whittled away due to Brookline's low free and reduced lunch participation, but
I will say this. I think what you're going to find, Helen, is if there's money to be found, I'll find it. And
Thank you, Sam.
I think that speaks
That's a good
to
segue to the next one.
That's what I
yeah,
wanted to tell you. Thank you
that
for
is the money
doing
I
this.
found. Yeah, the
Thank you
second
for
one.
doing this. I appreciate it.
Fung found the first. I can't take credit, but I will take credit for the second one. The second is a $200,000 grant, and the message or the lesson here is look at Jeff Riley's weekly memos for the commissioner, because there's some nuggets in there, and this is one of them, where the Cliff Notes version is, we got all this money, we thought we could spend it, we couldn't, there's 15 million left, come and get it if you want it. And I said, let's go get it. And sure enough, we got it. And it's for money that was stimulus funds in some shape or form. And it was for things that we were spending effectively. The money is going to target to reimburse the cost of the universal summer program, largely, that was targeted to pay out of ESSER 2. And now we're going to take it from ESSER 2. And I think there's some other summer programming as well that, we're going to in charge here. And then that all things being equal, that frees up $200,000 to carry into ESSER 3, because we're going to spend ESSER 1 first, then ESSER 2, then ESSER 3, because each successive ESSER has another year of end date to it. And so ESSER 3 has the latest, which is September 30th of 2024. And so I'm really pleased that we got this. In fact, the latest one, the latest memo had another grant opportunity that I've directed to another department. I don't want to say too much until we actually apply and get it. The pool isn't nearly as big. I think the pool, as opposed to 15 million, the pool is 400,000, and I think the awards go up to 50,000 per district. but 50,000 is 50,000. And so I'm pushing to at least apply for that. And that's what I'll continue to do as I see these opportunities. Happy to answer any questions about this as well, but that would complete all the gifts and grants that we're presenting.
I just want to say thank you to you and Fung for going out and finding this and making it happen. Stephen, I saw your hand was up.
Yeah, I was going to say the same also, Sam. That's awesome that you're combing the beaches for these little nuggets. I just have a question about the former gift. Do you know, just out of curiosity, what does that represent as a percentage of the expenditure on those items? Is it a full subsidy or is it a partial subsidy? Because usually E-rates are preferential rates established for the purposes of using technology for education.
I think in this case, it covers the entire cost.
Wow.
In this particular case.
Are we eligible for having recurrent costs reimbursed in this way as well, or is it only just capital expenditures?
I think depending on the recurring cost, I think you can get certain recurring costs covered. Clearly, the first part is not recurring. You buy the technology, and that's something we need to be mindful of. That in 4 years, generally, that's how long we keep this technology. It's going to need to be replaced, and we'll have to budget for that. But
okay, thanks, Sam. I was asking just because this has obvious positive implications for any potential investments we'd have to make if we have to, again, pivot to hybrid or remote education. So thanks so much for the clear explanation of what this is and how it
sure.
works.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Susan?
Yeah, one other question. So in the past, we have had someone who was really focused on grants and sort of beating the bushes and finding things like this. It's fantastic that you found this, Sam, because 50,000 is 50,000, and that's fantastic. One thing that we used to have, though, is somebody focused on this. I'm wondering if we are considering, as we kind of are bringing in a new team to the 5th floor, restructuring, whether this can be carved out as a part of someone's job, since it usually pays for itself pretty quickly, as we just saw, to kind of be scouring eligibility criteria and working with, knowing the district well enough and being able to look at different federal and state and local flows and trends of, programs. And Amy used to do a great job with this, but that position's been kind of got morphed a few different ways to focus on curriculum and other things, which is all great, but this is just a way for it just paid for itself. And some of us regret the loss of it, as happy as we are to kind of hear this today. Just sort of makes me wistful a bit. So I'm not sure what your thinking is on this more as a structural role. Again, it pays for itself pretty quickly.
Yeah, I guess my initial answer, and I've had to look into that history with some other restructuring that happened on the administrative support level. And so we have the administrative support to pull information together, track it. But I think at the higher level, like you're talking, the director level, it's something worth considering. I think the issue is, and Donna and I are working on this, is herding the cats, because you have special ed and entitlement grants, you have OTL and entitlement grants, you have competitive grants in these areas, you have, MECO is technically under OTL.
Yep.
You're right, you add it all up and it's, up. It can be
$15
upwards.
million.
It was in the $15 million range last I remember as well. Helen, when you do all of the, Title I grants, all of the federal flows, all of the state flows, any of the other flows, like you said, that are more specific, just to your point, and being able to just sit there and read all those emails and find, the press releases of different grant opportunities. And the other thing that she was able to do, she actually sat in OTL, although we can make a good argument that it should have been in administration and finance. But the other thing is that she knew enough about what was going on in OTL to say, oh, we really want to be accomplishing X with our English learner program, or we want to be accomplishing
Right.
X with our, and so she could actually go find things that matched strategically what we were looking for, and then work with the educators to basically do all the grant work. And she wasn't, I'm not sure she was that, I mean, she was what, a senior manager, I think. I'm not sure exactly. The titles were a little different back then. I mean, she was quite smart, quite
this?
talented.
Who is
Amy
this?
Martin.
And when
A
was
while
this?
ago. When?
Yeah.
I think a couple of years ago is
There
when
was-
that
Yeah.
restructuring
We've
happened,
always-
as I
since I've
understand
been-
it.
Since I've been on the school committee, there was a grants coordinator. We called him a grants coordinator at the time. Henry Bolter was the person for like 20 years or so. Then Amy came. And
But
then
Amy was a little bit higher level, and she could sort of strategically put things together. I
Maybe.
got the impression should identify things that were strategically of interest to our
Amy-
staff.
Can I
Amy
make
did
a little
that.
request? This is maybe
All
we
right.
can, we've sort of made it clear to Sam, the thinking and his, thinking on it, but we have so much on the agenda. Let's
Sorry.
park it. And no, it's okay. It's a good conversation. I just want to make sure we make it through. We've got a lot on the agenda. Is that okay with you, Sam, to just keep going?
No, your point is well taken,
Okay.
Susan. Update on the 22 budget. The only thing I would say here, things are, I mean, this certainly helps us. The two, especially the 200,000. Things are tracking, of course, the big unknown, both for 22 and 23, is settlements that aren't, for Unit A, Unit B. What I will say as an update, besides this 200,000, which ultimately, all things being equal, as I said, will add to ESSER 3 to roll forward, is what happened at, and I don't know if I'll mention it again, at a fall town meeting, we received an additional, it's 1,000,000, I think 194,000 and change. And that money, I don't think it's been posted yet. We have given the account to have those funds budgeted. And so that is reflected in what the spreadsheet was that I used to give a 6-year budget projection, for which we'll talk about later, not much later. And that, let me find the piece of paper quickly. But that's really, that is the update. I'm sorry, I have my back to. That is the update with respect to the 22 budget. Everything else is tracking as expected. I'm happy to answer any, but then again, in a month's time, I'll be presenting to the school committee mid-year where we are and what the projection is. But right now, there's no material change that I'm aware of from when we last spoke about how the budget is trending. I will say that 1,194,000 is being earmarked into personal services, and specifically in one account that had a large deficit budget to the tune of 1,560,000. And so at least that deficit is in 6 figures, not 7, by putting that amount.
Can you clarify a little bit more, Sam?
Sure. That deficit, I would have expected, I did talk to my predecessor during the transition of what comprised that. Because again, some deficit is to be expected, and largely turnover savings is what you would expect to have, because you don't know who's turning over, so you have to put it somewhere. But historically, that has been about $1 million less than this, 675,000, which I think is too high, by the way. And again, that number was $1 million larger than that. And I really didn't get a definitive answer of what made that up. Unfortunately, it just was there. And I hate to say it, I mean, I'm going to write a memo to Linus about it to document and memorialize, but effectively it was a plug to balance the budget. And so luckily we're still on track, but again, that number was roughly $1 million more than what was explained to me as what should have been in there. And so as an example, the budget I'm building for 23, I do have a negative number, but it's $500,000 flat for turnover because that's a more realistic number. You know, that would comprise roughly 15 or so teachers retiring at roughly $33,000 a turn. You know, example, a teacher retires at 100,000, we get a replacement at 67. Okay. And some monies that would go to material, there's a material fee charged, and some of that supports staffing. But that wouldn't be a negative, you would just allocate some staff to that. I can explain more, but that's you know, that's the place to put it because we haven't earmarked specifically where that $1,194,000 is going to go. Although I think the belief is at least some of it, and I mentioned this before, at least some of it would go to contract settlements, and at least some of it would hopefully go to reducing the cliff into 2023. But we don't know how much of each, and therefore this was as good a place to put it as any.
So, so just to clarify, the actual personnel costs when you had it all structured out were about $1 million higher than what had been put into the budget because there had been an extra $1 million offset to make it all match. And when you discovered that
correct.
this money essentially is going into clearing up that mismatch. And without this money, we would be scrambling to make up that difference.
Well, we'd have to make, all things being equal, you're correct. I mean, you are correct.
Okay. Do we have any, I realized also we didn't actually take the vote to accept the grants. We just talked about that. So we have to go back to that. But is there any other questions on 22 before we take that vote and then go on to 23?
Just a quick one, if I could. Oh, how much did we use of the ESSER 2 this year, in this year's budget?
For 22, I would 100% will be
It was
this year.
100%, which was, the number was 2 million, 4 million, I can't remember.
No. ESSER 2, which ESSER 2.
ESSER 2 is like 1.64.
That's right, about
1.64.
1 2 million is what ESSER 2 is. And then ESSER 3 is 3 2 And that's
And Helen,
what I'm looking
originally
at.
we had said that we were going to use like 200,000 of ESSER 2 in the previous year for tents, and we ended up not having to do that. So we had the whole 1.6 million available for
Correct.
this year. But we had originally said we used all of ESSER 2 and all of ESSER 3 originally for this year's budget to,
Correct again.
and
yeah.
it seems like we might be able to shift some, but not much.
Well, my goal is to save as much of ESSER 3 as we can into F23. That is correct.
Can we do the quick vote on to accept the grants? I'm going to move to accept the grants. Can I get a second? Thank you, Stephen. Susan? Is a yes? David?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, thanks. FY23. So we have 3 things in the FY23 discussion. The first is an update from last night's select board meeting on CIP and operating budget. Second thing is talking about the town facilities department budget request that came up at Capitol yesterday too. And then the third thing is sort of preliminary PSB 23 budget memo. Did everyone watch? Did everyone watch the select board last night? No. Okay. Did anyone besides me watch the select board last night?
I was there.
Okay.
So was Linus.
Helen, yes, okay, so Sam and Linus were, but none of the other finance members. Okay. So Sam, do you want to,
I can take a pass at it, sure.
yeah,
I'll start with operating because that was the lion's share of the discussion, and capital improvements was, I hate to say it, somewhat of an afterthought.
can I say that what happened was they were supposed to be presented, I think at 6:30, but they didn't present until maybe close to 8:30.
9, I would
9,
say.
yeah, it was hours behind. And so of course they were feeling antsy by the time they got to it. Anyway, go ahead, Sam.
So, the operating budget, and I had sort of a sense just in my experience what I thought I would see, and it largely came in line. Just to recap, so we had put in as a department a request of approximately a little under an 8% increase, or a $9.5 million increase. Knowing that, knowing that in the first pass that the town was not going to tap ARPA in any way, shape, or form, in this case specifically, to see what the deficit would be, just the gap. And so none of the revenue replacement was factored in, and I sort of figured it'd be about a $9 million shortfall. As it turned out, I was close. It was an $8.2 million shortfall with what we put in and what the town put in, and other recurring costs. And the 8.2 was allocated, roughly 6.6 million was a school shortfall, and 1.6 million was a town shortfall, at least at the first pass, based on an allocation model. There was talk about, what was the moving parts of our $9.5 million ask. And it was, Melissa did a good job of basically stating the facts, and just the facts, which were incorporating the $3 million shortfall that really started at 5, but we were able to, I believe, whittle it to 3 for, ESSER money not recurring. So that was a driver. 5% inflation on the roughly $16 million of non-salary. So that's an $800,000 driver. $1 million for strategic needs that are needed to be funded in advance of having a strategic plan fleshed out yet, because that'll drive F24. And then the last piece was a net cost of personnel moving forward on step, lane, those who have step and lane, annual wage adjustment with an offset of $500,000 for turnover. And those were all the moving parts. After that, I think there was discussion about enrollment, and what was the thought process about an ask like that. And there really wasn't an opportunity. It was totally, the discussion was within the select board. And so Mariah can fill in where I missed, but that was pretty much the substance of the discussion on the operating budget.
Yeah, I think that was a good summary. I think, as you said, there was not an opportunity to make clear that, although Melissa did outline sort of the drivers of the change, but essentially this is just a rolling forward budget. And I think that what's important to understand and for us to make clear is that if we look at sort of an all funds perspective, the percentage growth is pretty standard year to year. It's that we've been able to, we had federal funds offsetting the budget in the current year that aren't there for the next year. And that's some of the challenge that why there was a relatively large year to year town ask growth. But I'm sure we'll get the opportunity to clarify that more going forward and in the many opportunities that there will be. But with Melissa presenting it and the sort of the pace of the meeting, there wasn't that opportunity yet.
I may have missed this, but is that presentation somewhere in our folder? I'm sorry if I missed it. Can we get
I
it?
haven't seen it either.
If we can get a copy, if maybe someone can ask them for a copy of it so we can.
Well, isn't Melissa coming to present us?
She's coming to present to us tomorrow, not today.
So it'd be great if she could get us her.
Yeah, it is a great point. I'll ask and see if we can get it.
The other assumption that's in this budget is that 5% for GIC. I'm not clear where we are with GIC, but usually it comes in lower. And it's like 300,000 per percentage for GIC.
And that was pointed out in the presentation, exactly that, Helen.
And it's not clear how much we're going to get. I mean, I think the assumption was level funding from the state, and that's not clear to me either, that there would be level funding from the state. I think it might be more. The state's doing okay.
Do you want to talk, Sam, about the
Capital?
CIP? Yeah.
Sure. So again, the beginning talked about it, but then it was deferred to the end. And you know, largely the summary was, and again, Mariah will fill in the blanks, maybe Linus, the free cash was on the better side. It was, I think, about $14.25 million. But then there's a algorithm that the town utilizes to determine how that money goes. And in the end, when that was done, there was money, but there wasn't. And what I mean by that is there were programs already in place that sort of take off big chunks of money: roof replacement, ADA, HVAC. And when you start stripping that all away, and the leases were talked about as a drain on the overall pool of money. When that was pulled away, really the only discretionary money left was $340,000 for a public announcement system at the high school, because that was a health and safety #1 priority. $25,000 district-wide for furniture replacement, and $50,000 for mini CIP, and that was it. And again, Mariah, you can fill in, but the focus really amongst the select board was, well, if if the schools didn't need $2 million for leases, there's some money.
Yeah, and I think there was, and Helen, you listened, I'm sure you caught this too. There was confusion about the leases too, because, and I wasn't sure if Melissa's answer clarified it completely, in that they said, well, if enrollment's down, why do you need leases? It wasn't made clear that those were preschool leases and not, it might have been clear, it might not have been. There wasn't really clarification, but that those two things are somewhat separate. In any case, the other thing I think to point out, and our CIP request was, we had put in $3 million for mini CIP, and as Sam pointed out, we basically got a little bit less than 400,000 of the 340 for the PA system plus 50 for other. So we got about a little more than 10% of what we requested. And Sam, do you mind just going through what all the things, or Matt, what all the things were that we had put in for the CIP, just so that we're all on the same page of what was included versus not included?
Sam, do you have it open? The open gov list?
You're on mute, Sam.
I have it printed, and so I
One
can.
thing, while they're looking, just as a comment, 14 million in free cash is huge. It's more than I remember in most of the time I've been on. 11 million was the last highest number. And so it's hard to understand why there isn't more in the CIP. I know they did the stuff with the stabilization fund and the reserve fund, et cetera, but it's not
Yeah,
clear to me why there's
I
not.
have, I have what we submitted, or at least what was in our OpenGov submission. 75,000 for a study on the rehab and reuse of Baldwin, not funded. 400,000 for the study of the park renovation at Lincoln, not funded. 1,827,048 for the leases, that was fully funded. 3 million for deferred maintenance, and again, 390 was funded in the two categories that Mariah alluded to. Furniture upgrades, we asked for 160,000, we got 25. HVAC equipment was 450, and I think we got, I mean, for that piece, we got nothing. There's a standing program, but this was to really attack, I believe, the Baker, or maybe the Baker and Heath, and none of that was funded. And the master plan for 250, which was our number 2 priority, and that wasn't funded either. Those were the things we put in specifically.
Sam, to what extent are the standing programs, for example, the life safety systems programs, et cetera, that are funded, to what extent, and maybe this is a question for you, Matt, do those actually fund things that are in our mini CIP? Is there any overlap across those standing programs with what we had listed in the?
Not really.
Okay. Because
I
that's
mean,
all like paint, and our stuff is like paint and
Right.
floors
So,
and
you know,
stuff
in
like that,
that-
right?
In that list, you know, still to be in there, like I'll use the Baker School. Principal had asked for basically the second and third floor of the 1930s wing, the oldest part of the building, to be air conditioned. Charlie dropped a number of 400,000 in there. You know, I had it parsed out a little differently between third floor and second floor, just because the equity going across other buildings, we've been working our way through the top floors of schools. And generally the middle schools, our middle school age kids are on the top floor. So it's equitable across the system as to who gets climate control and sort of which the worst places are, which we all understand the top floor tends to hold the most heat. You know, so there may be a little bit, but in general, no, not too much.
I want to make sure, and I also see John Van Scoyox in the attendees. So John, if you're interested in joining us for the conversation, feel free to, you can raise your hand, I think. And then if we see your hand raised, Robin could promote you. And then also Cliff, if you are interested in commenting at all, let us know. I don't see John's hand up. I can't believe he doesn't want to come talk about this. So Helen, what do you make of the fact that free cash was 14 million, but the request was?
I'm trying to remember how she explained it, and I'm wondering if our debt service is higher. And that's because that comes, I think, out of this money, the debt service.
Maybe that was it. I don't know. I missed that part of it.
I don't think debt service comes out of free cash.
Oh, it doesn't. Thank you. So you
I
explained, Cliff, maybe, I think Cliff's the one who knows better.
Well, and John was the recipient of the presentation. So maybe between Cliff and John, one of them.
So just a couple of things. I did not watch, I did not listen, so I really can't comment too much, but free cash was over $14 million in 2019. It was about $13 million last year. The $14 million level is not, given where the town's been in recent years, probably not too surprising. Actually, it's surprising to me that it got that high, given all the struggles with COVID. But the waterfall which is really what governs the use of free cash, there have been a number of things that have been underfunded for quite some time. And I'm sure that a fair amount of this money went towards sort of either replenishing reserves, bringing them up to levels that, the town probably feels are needed to help maintain the AAA rating. A number of these things go back to BFAC. I have to actually take a look at how the waterfall is allocated. But at the end of the day, the CIP money comes out of that waterfall after 3 or 4 things. And it just sort of is, it is what it is. It's not top of the list, if you will.
I believe you're right, Cliff. I recall when you were talking, the goal was, I guess there was a dip in reserves, and the goal over the next few years, this year being one of them, or 23, was to get to a 10% benchmark for that AAA of reserves. And I think some of that money is a deposit into getting there.
What would 10% be, Sam?
10% of the operating budget, it's like $35 million or something in Brookline.
And do you know how far we are away from that? John, do you know also? I saw your face for a second.
Sorry, Steve, are you asking me?
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I actually raised my hand just to answer questions, which I obviously am not very good at, in case you had questions, but I didn't raise it in order to comment. Truthfully, that was the initial presentation last night. I heard some of you say, can we get a copy of it? And I immediately realized that, in fact, what was presented to us on the screen visually, we don't have a copy of. We do have a copy of the capital improvement plan, which I could link that in, but I don't.
We don't have a chat. I was skimming through the packet, and last night's packet was 3,000 pages long.
Oh, it's ridiculous. It was just insane. That's not an exaggeration, people.
It's 2,841 pages long, and I can't find anything. So
it was absurd. 500 pages for one of the cannabis licenses, 900 for another, and 600 for the other one. It was nuts. But so no, I'm just now I'm literally going to have to go through the tape of the meeting in order to sort of take some numbers off the screen and figure out what I think of the numbers. But I don't have that document in front of me either.
Can we ask Melissa to send it to us?
I'm just emailing her now.
Yeah.
Okay. I just feel bad for you, John.
The other thing was when I was watching it on Big, the screen was very blurry. It seemed like the connection at Big was very blurry, and so the broadcast was almost illegible. So that was another challenge I had in sort of following along with what was going on.
I do agree with the general sentiment that the 14 million free cash was quite a pleasant surprise, given the year that we've just been through. And I do think that's an interesting place to start in terms of trying to figure out what kind of a footing we're on for the next budget.
John, did the discussion now sort of clarify a bit of the request from the school committee, what Sam mentioned about sort of what things are rolling forward?
Yeah, it does clarify it. And I think it's important to also remind people of something they probably already are well aware of, which is the first presentation always has this kind of a gap in it. And it's until we get a closer look at the number that we get a sense of, why the gap is likely to close by the time we reach the end of the budget process, and where are the numbers that are sort of fungible, in that gap. The first presentation tends to be a worst case presentation. But on the other hand, we do have structural issues, in terms of what's built in, and it's the same old story. It's payrolls, personnel. They're they're the major part of what we do. We spend money on, and and then of course there's this unending kind of not a problem, but just sort of a reality of trying to figure out what part is education and what part is everything else, and how do you allocate the split fairly. So.
Can I just ask the more experienced members in this group what the range of funding our CIPs have received previously? Like not just as a percentage.
You mean, does the CIP request get fully funded or not?
Oh, I was just assuming it doesn't. And I was assuming that we get some percentage of what we request and what the range of that is. I mean,
Helen, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. It doesn't seem to have worked that way. In the last, I think since we've gotten into these leases of 1.6 million, that's been it. The last year we got nothing. So this is more this year than last year. That 1 million or 1.6 was used for enrollment. So for years we were adding classrooms. Once we no longer had space to add classrooms, we had to rent, and that's where the leases came in. And what has happened historically with schools is that we end up doing a full renovation, and then that gets a debt exclusion, and then that school's off gets fully updated, and and the problem is that you wait too long to do some of the things that could be done to make things much better.
Stephen, were you at Capitol yesterday? No, right? No. So one of the things we've been working on is having a sort of a tracking log of all of the deferred maintenance. And at this point, it's up to, we have to clean it up a little bit with the latest info, but in the over $10 million range. And so, when we asked for $3 million and we got $400,000. So how that, that just ends up deferring it even further, but it's a running record of what's going on.
Is that tracker disaggregated by like emergency and?
Well, so actually that was one of the columns I talked about adding into it. I can pull it up really quickly if people are interested.
Just because I wasn't at the meeting doesn't mean I get to ask.
No, but this is something that we talked about at the meeting and then said we were going to talk about again today because it has cross impact. But anyways, we did talk about, do you want me to pull it up quickly, Helen, just to show people what it looks like? Okay.
Yeah, I think it'd be good so people are familiar with it.
Yeah.
Basically, if there's an emergency, it gets taken care of. If there's a ADA issue, it gets taken care of. Life safety stuff.
Robin, can you turn on screen sharing?
Charlie has a budget for life safety, for
Thank you.
Security, for ADA. There's a few other items, Matt, maybe you remember the other ones, that are for all our buildings. It's not enough, but it certainly covers all.
Well, I think though that you're talking about the stuff, this is like the deferred, and really it should be called PSB deferred maintenance. It's called capital needs right now.
Yeah.
And there were some tracking things in here, and long story short, there's some pivot tables here. It shows you
Great.
The total is 13.6 million. This version of it, and it doesn't have the latest updates that Matt went through with the principals in the past. Was it this fall, Matt?
Yeah, and that's still a little bit in progress to plan this out for like the next 6 years. So
yeah,
things that hadn't been on there in the past, like a walk-in fridge or freezer, knowing the expected useful life, those might be coming up. And then sort of a slightly longer view, what's going to happen with the project after Pierce. We'll call it the end of the decade or start of the next decade. How much do we want to put into Baker and Lincoln and I'm not making a decision, but those are the two oldest buildings from a renovation or construction project. they're in all likelihood the next thing that's going to happen. So not to put too much out there all at once, but that's kind of why the long-term capital plan, master plan is a priority to get funded.
And to that point, one of the things we talked about with Charlie, well, last night at Capitol was this idea of, for example, Charlie talked about, well, can we break it out? Like, what is it, could he deal with the whole school in a summer? Or could he deal with like, all of the painting of everywhere in the system in a summer? And thinking about how we strategize, sort of planning forwards these programs to make them sort of manageable in a summer to however we handle them. And so that would be another way. And then the part that's also missing is, for example, a lot of these things we have totals for them, but they haven't actually been rolled out over multiple years. So this is still a work in progress, but it's a good start to think about that. And one of the things we talked about adding in was a column for essentially like a health and safety issue, in which case that jumps the queue and would go back to the front. But this whole thing doesn't include the ADA changes and everything else that are in the CIP. That's where I think it gets a little bit confusing, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's listed like life safety systems and ADA accommodations, but those aren't in our tracker at all.
Right. They're all individual warrant articles that get voted. So we talk about it like it's one big item, but it is a catalog of items, and some get funded and some don't.
But we don't have those changes at all in our deferred maintenance. We don't have, for example, a list of like, and it would be helpful, I think, to actually be able to see what our total ADA or any of those things is, have it in that deferred maintenance thing. And then it would actually be nice to be able to sync up the CIP dollar request with things that we see in our tracker. You know what I mean?
I do.
As opposed to all just in the brain of like you and Charlie, which is amazing, but it's also nice for the rest of us to be let in on the plan.
No, I fully get that. David's got his hand up.
Hi, David, go ahead.
Just to that point, Mariah, about being able to look at projects, maintenance projects by theme rather than by site. I think that would be very useful, because just looking at this chart that was shared, I see that there's a BEEP line item at Lynch for wheelchair accessible bathrooms for $300,000. And that's pretty significant. And I would hope that something that's ADA related would be near the top of our list, but it would be helpful to go category by category rather than just site by site.
Yeah.
I wonder too if there's a way to present that as cost efficiencies, so that, if something rises to the level of an emergency, you identify cost efficiencies for, maintaining other items that would be otherwise more expensive to cover later or separately. I mean, I guess what I'm really saying is I wonder if that would present a more compelling case.
I don't understand that. Can you say it again? Like
if it costs X to repair a few things at BEEP, and it costs Y to repair them separately. If one rises to the level of an emergency, it would be preferable to pay cost X instead of cost Y. And that could be a more compelling argument for packaging something. Yeah. But I recognize there's constraints.
Matt?
Yeah, so when we drop them into categories, basically adding a column for what I'll call the trade that's going to come in and perform the work. When we do that, there is a little bit of economy of scale. Now, historically in the past, we got $100,000 to maybe $250,000 to do these types of things, and then it sort of built up over the years. From an earlier meeting this year, might have been September, but Mariah had asked a question because the sticker price from 2019 was 16 million. We pulled Driscoll and Pierce off at this point. Well, why don't we just have an override and do it all at once? And my short answer was we could never get that much work done in the summer. So then it said, well, what if we parsed it into $3 million a year? Well, that we could do that, but again, that sort of kind of begs the override question, and there's a lot of asks for the town. So I'm not saying we shouldn't ask, but yeah,
I think though,
few more
you're-
weeks, we can articulate it, finish articulating it, I think in the details, and the pivot table will help sort and report. So once, if people want to download it and then tinker with it, have at it, and feel free to ask myself. And since Sam's my boss, I'm going to throw him under the bus and ask him questions, and we will get back to you.
Thanks, Matt. I do think though that the sort of having this table gives us a much stronger case for being able to get the funds to do the work if it's very clear what they're going to. Susan?
Just to state the obvious, I think part of the reason we need a strategic plan that we had asked for in the CIP is because there may be things that not only make sense to do together, but there might be things that make sense not to do at all. And there may be things that we should very much accelerate and things that we can deprioritize, but we won't know that until we really have a good sense of the facilities. So there's a particular, if we're going to end up selling a building, let's say, which some of us might want to do, and others of us might want to spend $8 million renovating it, just as an example. I just think that those are the kinds of things that would get surfaced, that we wouldn't renovate a building we're going to sell.
Let me say one thing real quick, Matt, and then I'll call on you. The other thing just to keep in mind is that some of these, I believe I heard that some of these requests, and I think we talked about this at Capitol, were not funded through this, but again, there's this ARP pool of money, which, for example, the strategic plan might not get funded through CIP, but the idea is it could get put in the ARP request. And when we had submitted our entire list, it was as a combined first for CIP, if not CIP, then ARP list. So that is also sort of a thing that has a pin in it that we need to get clarity on. Matt?
Yeah, so just as an example of what Susan said, so Baker air conditioning, we could do it with rooftop units and a more expensive, sophisticated system that might be double the cost of a ductless split. The ductless split may last about 10 years, and that may be the right answer and the right thing to do for the Baker building if Baker is, the next project. Where if we're not gonna do that, maybe we want to spend the money for the better system that's got a longer useful life. So, having that capital plan trickles down into a bunch of spending decisions that sometimes, may just be only in one person's head. So again, I just want to echo Susan and thank you for recognizing why we need it. I'm done.
We have, go ahead, John, and then I want to get to our own budget discussion too. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I actually I texted you, Mariah. Turns out that the documents are available, and if you just Google search Brookline Budget Central, they're there now.
Oh, good.
Which is good. And I wanted to echo what Mariah said about the CIP. I'm just speaking for myself, but I wouldn't read too much into what wasn't in the CIP from the schools, because I think that speaks more to the need to stay flexible and figure out what can be funded through, money that is coming from the federal government than anything else. And I did hear Mel reference that there would be town school partnership meetings scheduled soon to try to sort out some of this stuff.
Robin, I just sent those two links to you. Do you mind just forwarding them to the full committee?
I'll do that now.
Thank you. To the full school committee, not just finance, so everyone, and Sam and Linus and Matt and everybody. Thank you, John, for sending those.
Sure.
The other thing we need to talk about, which is in our agenda before we even get to our budget, is the request from Charlie from the building department for an additional 800,000. One thing I'm not clear about, well, so we talked about this at Capitol too. Charlie came and presented. One thing I was not clear about was whether or not that 800,000 had been already accounted for in Melissa's calculations Okay, so Helen's saying no.
I don't think so.
Yeah, and so does that turn the 8.2 into a 9? $8.2 million deficit into a $9 million deficit. I don't know. It was something that struck me during the presentation last night that I couldn't tell. I did not hear her mention explicitly, and I would have thought she might have, as she was going through the sort of slicing of the budget, that there was an additional $800,000 coming out of the buildings sort of support for the schools. Okay.
I'm pretty sure Charlie in his letter to us, which I think everybody had, where he made his request, said he was given 2.3 or 2.4 million and needed an extra 800. That he was level funded from last year. No.
Yeah, that's what I think he said that at our meeting, right? That he was level funded, but I wasn't sure if that meant our 800,000 was included or wasn't included in Melissa's budget. So that might be something, Sam, that you should clarify with her.
Agree.
Okay. And I don't think we necessarily need to get into all the details of what Charlie asked. I just wanted to flag for everybody that who wasn't at Capitol that there is also this additional 800,000. And one thing that we noticed at Capitol the other day is in FY17, Charlie's budget has gone, it was around 1.1, the school portion of his budget, and it's gone up to, it's almost doubled in the past 5 years.
It's gone
And
up
that
in 3, I think.
but what he said was, in response to my question of, so at what point is this, like, at what point are you whole? And he said, this is it, like this ask makes him whole. And we went through his line items, and a large amount of his line items are, I would say half of the 800,000 is an additional like ventilation work around replacing filters more often and so on and so forth.
So what, if I can, Mariah?
Yeah,
what
go for it.
Charlie says in his letter of September 10th, which we can share with the committee, in order to fully fund the repair and maintenance budget for FY23 and test, maintain, and repair the buildings, the total budget amount needed is 3.287550, $3,287,000 for outside service contractors and $1,697,000 for personnel costs, which I think totals about $5 million. This is an increase of $802,591 over last year's appropriation for services. There's no increase for personnel, and he's tried to get these, and then he explains what it is about and what he would do with it, sort of.
Does anyone have any questions about that?
And as I was saying at the meeting, for those who are new too, just so this is money that comes off the top from the full budget, this repair and maintenance. It's not CIP money. It comes out of the total town operating budget. And then after that, our share and the town's share of our budgets are decided. So you have X, and then you have X minus this amount that then is divided 60-40.
Helen, explain that again. So you're saying Charlie's budget comes off the top of all? Just re-explain.
Yes, for both the town, what he spends for the town and for the schools. And I'm thinking this $5 million is both a combination of town and schools, but I'm not sure.
Robin, do you mind forwarding that memo and the red and green spreadsheet? Basically everything that was attached to Capitol yesterday except the Capitol minutes.
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you.
Does that
And then
make
what was that other document? He
Minus-
sent us something or other, though, that was an email yesterday.
That email was the amounts that he got in 2017, 18, 19, and 20, which I had asked him to send to me, because my recollection had been we had funded it at one point, I think one in 2017, and you have that there, right?
Yeah. Robin, will you forward that the first document email too? The one that was just the email?
So, and that it had gone up over $1 million from.
Yeah, it was 1.3 in 2017 and now it's 2.4.
Right, and we, last year, he had gotten 2 million from the town, 2 million something, and we gave him 400. He asked for 800 last year, we gave him 450 out of our budget, not what came off the top. So when it comes off the top, it's split 50, 60, 40, well, 60, 40, right? When it comes out of our budget, it's 100%.
I have to say that I find the building department math to be new math. I can't follow along with any of this. I have no idea what's going on. It's
because it's mostly budgeted money and it's round numbers. And it's, this is approximately what I need.
Well, all of our numbers are budgeted, projected expenditures. The question is, like, if we had this is how much Charlie's budget is, this is how much he expects to spend on the schools versus everything else, and how much each of that has grown over time, that would be very helpful. And I don't understand it. And then looking at the second email, the one that was the second document yesterday, I don't understand what he talked about repair and maintenance budget, what that means versus, is that his contracted services as opposed to his staff? I don't know. The more I look at it, the less straightforward it feels to me. And it feels like this year is yet again a really important year to understand what's going on here. It's a big ask, and I don't think he expects to get it all either. He would hope to get some of it, and we may not be able to do any of it. And we said that to him yesterday too. Yeah, but being able to at least understand it would be the first step to being able to want to fund it. So, any other questions on the building department budget before we get to the last part, which is Sam showing us the bottom line figures for PSB? No? Okay. Sam, do you think you can actually pull up the spreadsheet so people have a visual on? You're on mute.
Yeah, I can pull up the Excel that was sent to Melissa, and that might be a good place to start. So let me get that, and then I can share my screen. Let me get it on the screen. One second. Here we go. Let's see. My apologies. Okay, so here it is, but then I want to. There, 1 second. There we go. Okay, so now what I want to do, share. Can you see the Excel?
Do you mind making it bigger?
Sure. Let's see.
Down at the bottom right, there's that slide bar with the 100%. If you hit the plus.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
That better?
Yeah.
Oh, let me widen this. So again, our base for now, this is the money we just got. If it was $1,196,071, 60% of the roughly $2 million that was revised for revenue for this fiscal year by the town. And so that becomes the base. And again, that's all going to salaries. And that's important when you look at the mechanics of the spreadsheet. We're asking for our total ask would bring our budget to 130,619,874. What's important to note, and I'll get to that in a minute, but let's first go through the mechanics of the, and this is what Melissa received, which was the underpinning for both 23, which she talked about, but then building a forecast for the next 5 years after. Okay. So the biggest driver, which is unique to 2023, was $3 million of what has been funded this year by ESSER that won't be, or the ESSER money won't be there to fund it again. And round numbers, as we talked about previously, for this fiscal year, besides the appropriation, which was a little under 120 million before this additional 1196071 occurred, there were funding from four other sources, two recurring, two not. The recurring funding was $2.3 million was for circuit breaker for special education. Another 500,000 was to be supported by materials fees that are generated. Those are both recurring and are expected and budgeted next year to recur. What wasn't recurring and what was expected to be fully utilized in F22, and it was touched upon, was approximately 1,300,000 and change from ESSER 2, because the expectation was over 300,000 was going to be expended last fiscal year for tent rental. And then the full measure of ESSER 3 for 3,700,000 approximately. So $5 million in 22 of what it takes to operate the public schools of Brookline was going to be funded by one-time funds. And so going into 23, the expectation is there would be a $5 million deficit structurally. By some good fortune, circuit, and this was in the first quarterly projection, so this isn't a secret. Circuit breaker came in $800,000 higher, 3.1 versus 2.3. And we have this $200,000 grant that can be used to backfill some of what was going to be spent in ESSER. Those two moving parts alone total $1 million. Okay. All things being equal, with that $1 million, we don't need to spend the $1 million this year. That $1 million carries over. Not only, and so that cuts the structural deficit from 5 million to 4 million. The reason it's cut to 3 million is that circuit breaker increase appears to be permanent. And so 2.3, which was in the base for 2022, 3.1 will be in the base for 2023. And so that's why I feel reasonably confident that $3 million is a good placeholder to be put in, absorbed structurally into F23. Again, the other moving parts, the inflation number is literally taking this 15,983,584 and adding 5% to it, because that's sort of where inflation's running right now for goods and for stuff. Collective bargaining, there's a placeholder here that is a best estimate of where we think, because no contract except for para professionals, Unit C, is settled for past F22. And so this allows for step, lane, and what we believe is a reasonable allotment for a settlement to occur. The 500, that's that 5,254,148. $500,000, again, that number used to be 675, but I don't see any way that we could achieve 675,000 in turnover savings, largely because, again, the average teacher retiring, and that's where you count on turnover, unit A, the average turn, maybe in Brookline, it's going to be between $30,000 and $35,000. And so that number represents roughly 15 or so teachers that would retire. You know, that's on the high side, but that's the number we're carrying. And then lastly, $1 million for immediate needs in advance. And these were part of the things that are in the budget, what do we call them? Not the guidelines, the budget guidelines that were voted. So items that are in the guidelines, some of those items are going to be reflected that $1 million will cover. And I think I'll stop there. The rest of the years are not important for right now, but those are all the moving parts. The last thing I would say is, even though the increase is 7.89%, if I looked at all the other moving parts, namely ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and then what it is expected for this year, for 23, the year we're projecting, year over year, all in, the increase is less than 5%. I think it came out to 4.9%. And 22 to 21 was largely the same, about 5%, because of all that one-time money. This was effectively flat year over year. And the bulk of the increase was using one-time funds, and the ESSA. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that was the rationale behind getting to the number that was presented to Melissa and part of her presentation.
Steve?
Just clarification question, Sam. Why doesn't schools base change from 2022 to 2023?
Because the base, because that's the base for 20, I could have put 21, I guess that's the base year. So, and that's the base year, it's the same number. I had to put it up there for it to carry. I see. It's just mechanics. This is the base year, and that's why you only see one number.
And just the bottom line is that we're looking at it around an average of a $9 million deficit going forward once the one-time funds run out.
Not a deficit. This is an increase.
That's an increase.
Yeah.
I mean, the town has talked about an $8.2 million deficit with the whole town, including our 9.55 S.
This is only the expenses side. We don't have the revenue side here to map what a deficit might or might not be.
Oh, thank you very much. I understand.
Yeah. And even when we get the first crack at revenues, which I think was presented last night, though again, the slides were blurry and I haven't looked at the links yet, the revenues will change because, as Helen mentioned, the insurance figures will show up, the state revenues will show up. The revenues will keep changing and the expenses keep changing. And generally the revenues keep going up and the expenses hopefully go a little bit down, but maybe not. But there's this, as John said at the beginning, like the presentation, the last night's presentation sort of is the worst presentation. It paints the bleakest picture.
So, and just to give this some, first, can I say something? I'm sorry.
Please, no, go ahead.
First of all, Sam, thank you for this. This is what I'm used to seeing as a budget and understanding it and the percentage increase. So I really appreciate that. And just to give it some sort of historical context, I think our budget has never just gone up 2.5% ever. The town's budget has never gone up just 2.5%. There's growth, so about 4% is my recollection. Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, in the past, except when we were having the enormous growth. That's when the budgets really started to zoom out of control. But 4% was a sort of a normal increase in the budget every year, 4 to 5. So just for context.
Any other comments from the committee? Or anyone else who'd like to comment? David?
So hearing that budget growth of 4 to 5% is normal, then it looks like going up to 2028, we might be a little over where we would want to be. Is that fair to say, Sam? Or do you think this is sustainable?
That's a very good question. I mean, the numbers that are driving, and we haven't touched on it, but, the superintendent who's, is developing a strategic plan that is going to be, I believe, fleshed out in the spring. By then, that's really, we're talking about 24 and beyond. There are placeholders there, depending on that strategic plan, that are, I'll use the word, they're pliable, right? I mean, 2 million is as good a number as any. I mean, in a district this size, $2 million, it doesn't take long to find programming that would fill that bucket. But, that's 1.5 points roughly. So if those 2 million slots were 0, you'd be looking at numbers in the lower 4s, so that gives you and I don't think the committee would want to see zeros, but 2 million might not be either. I mean, for that 5-year look, that's $10 million of programming that's new over and above inflation, which I've used 3% in those out years, because that's normal inflation to keep pace. This is an unusual year with supply chain. Again, I think with the strategic plan, those are placeholders. Those will get a little firmer as we see what comes out of it. But at least, those are holders to put in there. That is my best explanation.
All right, thank you.
Susan?
Yeah, just to state the obvious on sustainability, I think there are sort of, near-term ways and long-term ways to think about sustainability. I think there have definitely been moments in the last decade when there are folks in Brookline who wanted us to look at sustainability within Prop 2.5. So what would it look like to try to stay within Prop 2.5, which no towns and municipalities reasonably do. But I think then there's also, how do we think about sort of fully loaded compensation, benefits, fair wages, where we would want to be, what our peer districts are doing, and what kind of growth they're experiencing. They're just different ways to think about sustainability. And so I think if we're thinking about a 1, 2, 3 year question, it's a little bit different from kind of that longer term question. And I think we probably, if we're doing a strategic plan, we probably should think a little bit about both. And because I think strategic plan is sort of what are all the things we want to be able to accomplish and which ones are we prioritizing and which ones are reasonable. The only other thing I would say is that given our sort of the inflation uncertainty of the next number of years, we might also in a longer term frame need to think about scenario planning and modeling as opposed to one inflation number. So for a 1-year budget, that's one thing, but if we're going to try to do multi-year strategic planning, we probably need to think about modeling inflation as well, which we haven't had to recently. So just a thought.
But this budget does model inflation.
It's a flat 3, but I guess that certainly those levers can be changed. I mean, that's as good as
yeah. 5 and then 3. What did you mean, Susan? I just want to get clarity what you mean.
No,
Susan.
Go ahead, Sam. Well, Sam may be answering my question. Go ahead.
Well, no, the 23 we know is an unusually with supply chain higher than usual inflation. Typical inflation is 2 to 3%, I would say, if you went in the past 10 years or so. And so 3% is a little conservative. You could model that down to 2, that's gonna, that'll save you some money, but, as a 1/10 of a point, maybe.
Yeah, I guess I mean something, I guess, so one is an assumption, which is what's our assumption? I think when I mean modeling and scenarios, I mean, what if inflation's at 2, what if it's at 4? More of a scenario question than a assumption question.
Got it. So essentially, what's the range we could do rather than having one sort of projection? It's sort of the range of, it could be this, but then it could be as low or as high. That makes sense.
And we don't have to, and there are lots of, you can infinitely do scenarios. I think the trick is to pick 2, 3, 4 things that you think are it's most sensitive to. And if we think inflation is one of them, and it may not be, but I think the bigger question I was trying to get to was, almost no district that I know of is able to live within Prop 2.5 permanently. And so the question is, what does sustainability mean? What does it look like? So not an annual budgeting exercise, but when we start talking about strategic planning and multi-year budgeting, that is one of the things that I think we're going to have to understand from our peer districts. That's all.
Thanks. Any other comments on where Sam is going? I want to echo what Helen said, and that it was very clear to sort of follow along with the table and get where we were, what was going on here.
So I would just I have a lot of comments to make about the conversation today, but just on this particular point about modeling and 2.5%, I'm not sure that I remember anyone saying that you have to live within Prop 2.5 just because of how, new growth and other revenues that the town pulls in. But it probably is useful to understand or to examine what the town's annual revenue increase X, things like debt exclusions has been over the last 10 years. Because when you're thinking about the revenue side and what might be available, if you're going to have a consistent, close to probably 30 or 40% differential in terms of expense growth versus town revenue growth, which has probably been in the 4 to 4.5% range on average. That's going to just increase your structural deficit and fairly fast. So, when you talk about scenario planning, at some point you're going to have to start thinking about the revenue side of the equation, and that's and how it impacts the way you need the budget on the expense side. I think there's probably a fair amount of data that you could be looking at right now on that as well.
Since you have said you have a lot of comments, Cliff, why don't you make your lot of comments?
So I'm not sure that I agree with Helen's description of how the town school partnership budget was working historically with respect to Charlie, and how it might be working now with the way they're doing things. I think it's really important that, because there's a lot of conversation about Charlie and revenue and who's doing what, that there be a firm understanding, not just of how historically it was working, but also how it is working moving forward. And quite frankly, and we've asked this at the town school partnership, beyond just hearing 60-40, and maybe that's a straight revenue split the way they're doing it, we really haven't gotten any detail as to whether or not there's anything being taken off the top or not. And I personally find that I don't have the same level of comfort as I used to have, because there was a table that talked about the fixed costs off the top, and then what in the adjustments for special education and growth, and then what happened to funds after those fixed costs. And that, I believe, is where issues like Charlie and the money that he had available and why he was coming to look for additional money kind of played in. I don't think the building department was taken, quote unquote, off the top. So I just think it's important for us all to, have the correct information. The other thing
Cliff, can I
I'm
ask one,
sorry.
just one
Yes,
follow-up on that?
please.
Do you
Yeah,
think it
yeah.
makes sense to ask that this come up at the next town school partnership to get some clarity on this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
We can do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The only other comment I wanted to make as it relates to growth and expenses is that, last year, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that the enrollment numbers were substantially lower, obviously than people thought, not this year, last year. And that going into this year, there's a lot of uncertainty as to what was going to happen to enrollment. Was there going to be a huge bounce back and everyone's going to just come right back? Or were we going to stay at a level that was close to where we ended up, I guess, in the prior year? And because of that, there was a conscious decision made, and one certainly that I supported at the time, as it related to employment and class sizes and all that type of stuff. And I didn't hear any conversation today about revisiting that discussion. And, I could be wrong, but I think that our population is still substantially down from where it was a couple of years ago. And if that is closer to a new normal than an expectation of bouncing back another 600 kids, then I think there's something on the expense side that needs to be examined that wasn't discussed today.
I think that that's a great point, and it's something that's come up at other moments, but not necessarily today. And my personal feeling, I don't think we've had the chance to talk about this as a full school committee or the finance committee, is that I still think that we are in a phase of uncertainty around enrollment. I'm not saying that it's going to last 3 more years, but at least I feel that for the fall, I feel that very much so, like we're just hearing 2 weeks ago about borders closing again in some countries in response to Omicron. So it seems to me that we are certainly still in a situation where there's a huge amount of moving parts around visas and international enrollment. And so I think that that aspect still, to me, is very much something where we don't know when that's going to change, and we wouldn't want to short students for the upcoming year. David, go ahead. And I just want to flag that we're a couple minutes over, so hopefully we can wrap this up in the next 3 to 5 minutes.
I was just going to add to what you said, Mariah, that there have been some instances where we have looked at enrollment patterns and have adjusted accordingly. So we do have some 2-section grades now, which had not been the case in decades. So it is something that we're actively doing and will continue to do where appropriate.
Helen, did you have your hand up? No? Okay. Yeah, and the other thing that I thought was interesting from the enrollment presentation a couple of weeks ago is that although we had talked about aiming for a 19 average classroom, it's closer to 20, which isn't to say that it's, the right number or anything like that, but just that it's certainly not like we're down in the 16 average or something like that. But I think it's a great point, Cliff, and it's something that we need to make sure that we are all on the same page on, and that we are making sure that we're, as David said, looking where we can still be not shorting it as an overall program, but looking at where we can make surgical cuts.
I actually do have one statement, if I could.
Go for it.
But I think another piece that you need to keep in mind, Cliff, is not as obvious, I think, but we know that the pandemic has caused all sorts of academic regression or not the appropriate progression that we would want. And having this smaller class sizes allows the teachers to really work with the children in ways that when you have larger class sizes, it's much more difficult. and then you end up spending the money on the special education side. So either you pay one way or you pay the other in many ways. But I think that's probably not just a year of catch up, but I may be wrong. I mean, that's something we need to look at.
Certainly, though, these are topics that are going to come up, I think, in the near future. Anyway, I want to be respectful of people's time. It's 6:36. I think we'll draw this meeting to a close, and we have on the agenda for tomorrow night a discussion with Melissa around ARP as well. So thank you, everybody, and see you tomorrow.
Night.
Bye.